A poor maid recognizes what doctors overlooked, and her actions save the billionaire's daughter. It all starts when a young maid sees the girl collapse at a fancy mansion party, while the top doctors shrug and call it genetics. But the maid sees something no one else does, something she's seen before, something that once destroyed her own family, and when she tries to warn them, the rich and powerful shut her down hard. But the truth hiding inside that mansion is darker than sickness, and someone is watching her every move, someone who needs the billionaire's daughter gone, and the poor maid silent. Now, the only person who can save the heiress is the one everyone ignores, but if the maid keeps digging, will she save the girl's life or lose her own? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The morning sunlight streamed through the towering windows of the Hale mansion, catching the crystal in Ilara Ward's hands and scattering tiny rainbows across her dark skin. Her movements were practiced and gentle as she polished each piece, making sure no fingerprints or dust marred their perfect surfaces. The familiar motions couldn't stop her mind from wandering to Micah, though it had only been 3 months since she'd lost her brother, but the pain felt as fresh as yesterday. She lifted a crystal champagne flute to the light, checking for spots she might have missed. The weight of it in her hands reminded her of holding Micah's thin fingers during those final days in the hospital, when the doctors still insisted it was just a common flu. If only they'd listened sooner. If only they'd run the right tests. Her throat tightened, and she took a slow, steadying breath. Keep moving forward, she whispered to herself, echoing words Micah used to say. Even on his worst days, he'd found ways to make her smile. The grand ballroom around her buzzed with activity as other staff members hung garlands and arranged flowers for tonight's charity gala. The crystal chandelier above cast dancing lights across the marble floor, which had been polished until it gleamed like glass. Everything had to be perfect. Mr. Hale accepted nothing less. "Ilara, honey, can you help me with these centerpieces?" called Maria, one of the older maids, from across the room. "These flowers just won't cooperate." Setting down her polishing cloth, Ilara moved to help, her sensible black shoes silent against the floor. Years of working in wealthy homes had taught her how to move without being noticed. It was a skill that seemed especially valuable today, as early guests had already started arriving for pre-gala meetings. As she adjusted roses in an elaborate silver vase, voices drifted in from the adjacent sitting room. The double doors stood slightly ajar, carrying the conversation clearly to where she worked. "The help these days," a woman's voice said, dripping with disdain. "You simply cannot find quality service anymore. My last maid actually asked for paid sick leave. Can you imagine?" Laughter followed, brittle and sharp like breaking ice. Ilara's hand stilled on the flowers, but her face remained carefully neutral. She'd learned long ago that showing reaction to such comments only made things worse. "At least yours spoke English," another woman replied. "Half of mine can barely understand basic instructions, but what can you expect? Good help is so hard to find these days." Maria caught Ilara's eye and gave a small, understanding shake of her head. They'd both heard worse over the years. Still, each dismissive comment stung, reminding Ilara of similar attitudes she'd encountered during Micah's illness. Doctors and nurses who'd barely listened, who'd treated their concerns as inconvenient interruptions to their day. The morning wore on into afternoon as final preparations continued. Ilara moved from task to task with quiet efficiency, adjusting place cards, straightening chair covers, ensuring the serving stations were properly stocked. Her grandmother had always told her that dignity wasn't in what you did, but how you did it. "Walk like you're carrying a crown," she'd say, "even if you're carrying a mop." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the windows, The staff retreated to their designated areas. Alara stood in the back hallway, watching as the first properly invited guests began to arrive. Women in designer gowns that cost more than she made in a year floated past, trailing expensive perfume. Men in perfectly tailored tuxedos laughed and shook hands, their watches glinting in the chandelier light. From her position, she could see but not be seen, another skill learned over years of service. The orchestra began to play, their music weaving through the growing crowd of Arlington's wealthiest citizens. Crystal glasses clinked, jewelry sparkled, and beneath it all, an army of invisible workers like herself kept everything running smoothly. Alara straightened her black uniform dress and checked that her hair was still neatly secured. The night stretched ahead of her, full of tasks to complete and services to render. She couldn't know that before the last guest left, before the final glass was cleared away, everything she thought she knew about her place in this world would be challenged. For now, though, she simply watched and waited. One more shadow in a back hallway, carrying the weight of her brother's memory and her own quiet determination to somehow make a difference in a world that seemed determined not to notice her at all. The sound of laughter echoed from the ballroom, bright, carefree, and worlds away from the silent hallway where Alara stood. She adjusted the cuff of her uniform sleeve, took a deep breath, and prepared to do what she did best. Serve invisibly, observe carefully, and keep moving forward, just as Micah would have wanted. The gala was now in full swing, the grand ballroom transformed into a sea of designer gowns and perfectly pressed tuxedos. Crystal glasses clinked delicately as servers wove through the crowd with practiced grace, their silver trays laden with hors d'oeuvres and champagne. From her position near the staging area, Alara kept a watchful eye on the proceedings, ready to refresh empty pitchers and maintain order behind the scenes. The air hummed with classical music and polite conversation, punctuated by occasional bursts of reserved laughter. Alara moved efficiently between the kitchen and the staging area, her black uniform helping her blend into the background as she ensured everything ran smoothly. She had just finished arranging a fresh tray of water pitchers when the room's attention shifted toward the small stage at the front. Aurora Hale stepped up to the microphone, her emerald evening gown catching the light. Even from a distance, Alara could see why people were drawn to her. Unlike many of the guests who treated the staff like furniture, Aurora always offered a gentle smile or kind word when their paths crossed. Tonight, she looked especially elegant, though Alara noticed a slight pallor beneath her carefully applied makeup. "Good evening, everyone," Aurora began, her voice warm and clear. "Thank you all for joining us tonight to support the Children's Medical Research Foundation." She paused, touching her throat lightly. "As many of you know, this cause is particularly close to my heart." Alara watched as Aurora's hand gripped the podium more tightly. Something wasn't right. The young woman's words began to slow, her breathing becoming more labored. Then, mid-sentence, Aurora's knees buckled. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Aurora crumpled to the stage floor. The orchestra's music cut off abruptly, replaced by the scraping of chairs and worried murmurs. Victor Hale's commanding voice cut through the chaos. "Someone call 911! Where are the doctors? I know we have physicians here tonight." Alara stood frozen, watching as 3 men in expensive suits rushed forward, identifying themselves as doctors. Victor hovered nearby, his usual commanding presence tinged with naked fear as he watched them examine his daughter. The crowd pressed closer, their earlier polish giving way to morbid curiosity. "Give them space," Victor barked at the gathering crowd, including his own staff who had instinctively moved to help. "Everyone back. Let the doctors work." Alara retreated with the others, but continued her work, clearing abandoned glasses and straightening knocked-over chairs. It gave her a reason to stay close, to observe. she couldn't shake the feeling that something about this scene was hauntingly familiar. The doctors spoke in urgent, hushed tones, using medical terminology that floated across the room in fragments. Genetic heart condition, family history, immediate treatment required. One of them had removed a stethoscope from his evening jacket, while another checked Aurora's pulse with practiced fingers. Paramedics arrived within minutes, their efficient movements and modern equipment a stark contrast to the vintage elegance of the ballroom. As they transferred Aurora onto a stretcher, Elara moved forward to clean the area where she had fallen, her movements automatic after years of service. That's when she saw it. Aurora's hand hung limply off the side of the stretcher, and in the bright lights of the ballroom, Elara could clearly see her fingertips. They were beginning to darken, taking on a bluish tinge that made her heart stop. She knew that color, had seen it before, spreading across her brother Micah's hands in the days before his death, even as doctors insisted it was just poor circulation from his genetic condition. The memory hit her like a physical blow. Micah in his hospital bed, his fingers darkening day by day, his symptoms dismissed and misdiagnosed until it was too late. The doctors had been so certain, so dismissive of her family's concerns, just like these doctors now, confidently discussing genetic conditions while Aurora's fingertips told a different story. Elara stood rooted to the spot, watching as they wheeled Aurora toward the exit, Victor striding alongside the stretcher, his face tight with worry. The similarity was too striking to ignore. This wasn't a genetic condition, Elara was sure of it. She was watching someone being poisoned, just as her brother had been poisoned. The same horror that had gripped her during Micah's final days returned full force as she stared at Aurora's darkening hand, knowing that without intervention, this story would end the same way, with doctors confidently wrong and another life needlessly lost. Around her, the gala dissolved into quiet chaos as guests gathered their belongings and staff began the early cleanup. But Elara remained still, her eyes fixed on the doorway where Aurora had disappeared. The image of those darkened fingertips burned into her memory. She had failed to save her brother. The thought of watching another person suffer the same fate made her stomach turn. The crystal pitcher in her hands reflected the chandelier light, distorting it into strange patterns that seemed to mock the gravity of the moment. In its warped surface, she could almost see Micah's face, could almost hear his voice urging her to speak up this time, to not let history repeat itself in terrible silence. The grand ballroom slowly emptied, leaving behind scattered evidence of the evening's chaos. Half-empty champagne glasses, displaced chair cushions, and abandoned evening programs. As the last guests were escorted out by security, Elara mechanically helped the other staff members begin the cleanup, her mind still replaying the image of Aurora's darkening fingertips. The massive crystal chandelier dimmed to its nighttime setting, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Other staff members whispered among themselves about what had happened, their theories ranging from exhaustion to something more serious. Elara kept quiet, her thoughts too heavy to share. "You can finish this tomorrow, Ward?" Mrs. Peterson, the head housekeeper, said kindly. "It's been a long night for everyone." Elara nodded gratefully and made her way through the servants' corridors to her quarters in the East Wing. The small room was simple but comfortable, a single bed with a handmade quilt, a desk that doubled as a vanity, and a window overlooking the garden. Usually the view of the rose bushes her grandmother had planted years ago brought her peace. Tonight it only reminded her of loss. She pulled out her laptop, the blue light harsh in the darkness. Her fingers trembled slightly as she typed, "Blue fingertips poisoning symptoms." Page after page of medical websites appeared, but none seemed to capture exactly what she had witnessed. She opened her phone's gallery, scrolling back through photos from last year. Birthday celebrations, family dinners, hospital visits. Finally, she found what she was looking for. A picture of Micah's hands resting on his hospital blanket, his fingertips showing that same telling discoloration. The clock on her nightstand showed 2:30 in the morning, but sleep felt impossible. She pulled out her grandmother's worn leather recipe book, its pages soft with age and use. Her fingers found the familiar entry: cleansing tea for toxins. The careful handwriting detailed ingredients she knew by heart: dandelion root, milk thistle, burdock, and other healing herbs her grandmother had grown in her garden. Trust the old ways, her grandmother used to say. Sometimes they see what modern eyes miss. As the first light of dawn crept through her window, Elara finally dozed off, the recipe book open on her chest. She woke just before 6, her usual starting time, feeling gritty-eyed but determined. In the small kitchenette attached to her room, she carefully measured and mixed the herbs according to her grandmother's instructions. The familiar motions brought back memories of watching her grandmother prepare remedies for neighbors, her strong hands working with quiet confidence. The tea needed to steep for exactly 17 minutes, not a minute more or less, according to the recipe. While she waited, Elara changed into her work uniform, smoothing the dark fabric with trembling hands. What she was about to do could cost her her job, but doing nothing could cost Aurora her life. She poured the tea into an elegant bone china cup from her grandmother's set, the only piece she had kept. The liquid was a gentle amber color, with a subtle, earthy aroma. Tucking it carefully onto a service tray, she made her way through the quiet morning corridors of the mansion. 2 private nurses sat outside Aurora's room, checking medical equipment and making notes on their tablets. They barely glanced at Elara as she approached. She was just another member of the household staff, invisible as always. She knocked softly on the heavy wooden door. "Come in," Aurora's voice called, weaker than usual, but still carrying that inherent grace that characterized everything she did. Elara entered, her heart pounding so hard she worried the teacups might rattle on the tray. Aurora was propped up against a mountain of pillows, her designer pajamas somehow still looking elegant despite her pallor. Medical monitors beeped quietly beside her bed, their screens displaying numbers and patterns Elara didn't understand. "Good morning, Miss Hale," Elara said softly, using every ounce of practiced calm she had developed over years of service. "I thought you might like some tea." Aurora's smile was tired but genuine. "That's very thoughtful. The doctors say I should stick to water, but honestly, I'm tired of it." She gestured to the collection of water bottles on her bedside table. Elara approached slowly, setting the tray on the side table. Up close, she could see that the bluish tinge in Aurora's fingertips had deepened overnight. Her hands shook slightly as she poured the tea. "This is—" Elara hesitated, then found her courage. "This is a special blend. My grandmother used to make it for people who needed healing." Aurora's eyes, sharp despite her weakness, studied Elara's face. "You're worried about me," she observed, her voice gentle. More than just normal concern. Elara met her gaze, seeing not the billionaire's daughter, but simply a young woman in danger. "Yes, Miss Hale, I am." She held out the delicate teacup, feeling as though she was offering much more than just tea. In that moment, all her fears collided. Fear of losing her job, fear of making things worse, fear of watching another person die from a poison everyone else refused to see. But stronger than all of these was the memory of Micah's face and his unwavering belief that doing the right thing mattered more than doing the safe thing. Aurora reached for the cup, her darkened fingertips wrapping around the fine china. "Thank you," she said simply, but her eyes held questions she was too polite to ask. Elara stood back, her hands clasped tightly together, praying that her grandmother's wisdom would prove true once again. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows, casting a golden light across the room, and in it Elara thought she caught a glimpse of her grandmother's reassuring smile. The fragrant steam rose from the teacup as Aurora brought it closer to her face, hesitating for just a moment. Her hands trembled slightly, causing tiny ripples in the amber liquid. "It's all right," Elara whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "I promise you, this will help, and I won't tell anyone about it if you don't want me to." Aurora's eyes met hers, searching for something. Trust, perhaps, or reassurance. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her, because she lifted the cup to her lips and took a small sip. Her expression changed from uncertainty to surprise. "It's actually quite pleasant," she murmured, taking another sip. "Like honey and herbs, but something else too. Something earthy." Elara watched intently as Aurora continued to drink the tea, noting every subtle change in her condition. Within minutes, the labored edge to her breathing began to soften. The slight tremor in her hands steadied. Even her complexion seemed to improve, the sickly pallor giving way to a healthier pink. The medical monitors beside the bed began showing changes too. The erratic patterns on the screen smoothed out, becoming more regular. Numbers that had been flashing red shifted to yellow, then green. Elara was just gathering the empty cup, preparing to make her quiet exit, when the door burst open with such force that it bounced against the wall. Victor Hale filled the doorway, his imposing frame rigid with anger, his face thunderous. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the peaceful atmosphere like a knife. "Who authorized you to be in here?" His eyes locked onto the teacup in Elara's hands, and his expression darkened further. "What have you given my daughter?" Elara took an involuntary step backward, her throat closing with fear. "Sir, Daddy, stop!" Aurora interrupted, her voice stronger than it had been in hours. "She was just trying to help." Victor strode into the room, pointing at the door. "Get out. You're fired. I'll have security escort you." "Mr. Hale." Elara found her voice, small but steady. "Please look at the monitors." He whirled to face her, ready to continue his tirade, but something in her calm determination made him pause. His eyes flicked to the medical equipment, and she saw the moment the data registered. His anger faltered, replaced by confusion. "That's impossible," he muttered, moving closer to the screens. "These readings, they were critical less than an hour ago." He turned to Aurora, who was sitting up straighter, her breathing noticeably easier. "How do you feel?" "Better, Daddy," Aurora said softly. "Much better. The tea helped." Victor's gaze snapped back to Elara, sharp with suspicion and bewilderment. How did you know what to do? What did you give her?" Elara's hands tightened around the empty teacup, her grandmother's precious china warm against her palms. The weight of memory pressed against her chest, making it hard to breathe. She didn't want to speak about Micah, didn't want to open that wound again. But Aurora's life might depend on it. "I recognize the symptoms," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the pain. "The darkening fingertips, the irregular heartbeat, the weakness that came on suddenly. I've seen them before." She took a deep breath, feeling tears prick at her eyes. "My brother Micah showed the same signs 3 months ago." The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of the monitors. Victor's expression shifted, the anger draining away, replaced by something more complex. "Your brother," he repeated slowly. "What happened to him?" Elara lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. "He died, sir. The doctors said it was a rare genetic condition, but I watched those symptoms develop. They're exactly the same as what Miss Hale is experiencing now. Exactly the same. Her voice caught on the last words, memories of Micah's final days threatening to overwhelm her. Victor sank into the chair beside Aurora's bed, his face pale. For the first time since Alara had known him, the powerful hotel magnate looked shaken. He reached for his daughter's hand, his fingers gentle as they examined the darkened tips. "The same symptoms," he echoed, looking from Aurora to Alara and back again. "But this tea, it helped. It's an old family recipe," Alara explained softly. "My grandmother was a healer in our community. She taught me about natural remedies, about paying attention to signs that others might miss." She swallowed hard. "I couldn't save Micah, but when I saw Miss Hale showing the same symptoms, I couldn't stand by and do nothing. Not again." Victor stared at Alara, his expression shifting as recognition slowly dawned. "Ward," he said quietly. "Your last name is Ward?" His voice had lost its edge of anger, replaced by something that sounded almost like dread. Alara nodded, uncertain about this sudden change. "Yes, sir. From the Pine Grove community." The color drained from Victor's face. He released Aurora's hand and stood up, running his fingers through his silver hair. "Pine Grove," he repeated, the words heavy with meaning. "Of course, the water contamination case." He began pacing, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble floor. 3 years ago, the shell company that Hale Industries accidentally acquired. We didn't know about the chemical dumping until it was too late. Alara's heart stuttered in her chest. She'd heard whispers about corporate involvement in the contamination that had plagued her neighborhood, but the connection had never been clear. Her grandmother had always said the earth remembered what was done to it. That poison had a way of coming back around. "Sir?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor turned to face her, his shoulders sagging with the weight of revelation. "We bought land from a company that turned out to be dumping industrial waste. By the time our auditors discovered the truth, the damage—" He swallowed hard. "The damage was already done. To your community. To your family." The room felt suddenly too small, too close. Alara's hands trembled around the teacup she still held. All those sick neighbors, all those mysterious illnesses that the doctors couldn't quite explain. Micah. Her chest ached with the weight of understanding. "We tried to make it right." Victor continued, his voice rough with emotion. "Settlement payments, medical funds, but clearly—" He looked at Alara, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. Clearly it wasn't enough. "Your brother." "Micah," Alara supplied softly. "His name was Micah." "Micah." Victor repeated, the name a quiet acknowledgement of guilt. "I am so deeply sorry, Miss Ward, for everything your community endured, for what your family lost." Before Alara could respond, a harsh beeping cut through the air. Aurora's monitors were flashing red again, the numbers spiraling downward. Her face had gone grey, her breathing becoming laboured once more. "Daddy?" Aurora's voice was thin with fear. "I don't feel—" She didn't finish the sentence. Her eyes rolled back, and she slumped against the pillows. The monitors screamed their warning as her vital signs plummeted. Victor lunged for the emergency call button, while Alara rushed to Aurora's side, checking her pulse. Within seconds, doctors and nurses flooded the room, pushing them both aside. "It's the genetic condition," one doctor insisted, adjusting medication levels. "These episodes are to be expected. The testing clearly showed—" "No," Victor interrupted, his voice sharp. "Look at her hands. Look at the progression of symptoms. This isn't genetic. Someone is doing this to my daughter." The medical team exchanged skeptical glances, but continued their work, speaking in clipped medical terms as they tried to stabilize Aurora's condition. Alara backed away, making room for them to work, but Victor caught her arm before she could leave. "Please," he said softly, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. "You recognized what was happening. You knew how to help her." His eyes, when they met hers, were stripped of all pretense and power. In that moment, he wasn't a billionaire or a CEO, he was simply a father terrified for his child. "I'll protect you, whatever you need, just help my daughter." Alara looked at Aurora's still form on the bed, surrounded by medical equipment and professionals who seemed to be missing what was right in front of them. She thought of Micah, of how helpless she'd felt watching him slip away. She couldn't save her brother, but maybe she could save Aurora. "I'll help," she said quietly. "But Mr. Hale, if someone is really poisoning her, we're dealing with more than just symptoms. We need to find out who and why." Victor nodded grimly. "Whatever it takes, whatever resources you need." As the medical team continued working, Alara slipped out of the room, her mind already racing through the herbs and remedies she'd need to prepare a stronger tea. But as she walked down the long hallway, the hair on the back of her neck stood up. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of hostile eyes following her movement. She glanced over her shoulder, but the corridor was empty. Still, her grandmother had always said to trust those instincts. They were the body's way of sensing danger before the mind could name it. And right now, every instinct she had was screaming that there was something wrong in this mansion, something darker than the gleaming marble and crystal could hide. Her steps quickened as she headed for the service stairs, but the feeling of being observed didn't fade. Someone was watching, waiting, perhaps already planning their next move. The question was, who had the most to gain from Aurora Hale's death, and how far would they go to achieve it? Dawn painted the mansion's windows in soft pink and gold as Alara began her morning routine. Her cleaning cart squeaked softly against the marble floors, but today her mind wasn't on dusting or polishing. She had work of a different kind to do. The kitchen was her first stop. She nodded to Maria, the head cook, who was already kneading bread dough for the day. "Just need to check under the sinks," Alara said casually, pulling on yellow rubber gloves. "Found some water damage yesterday." Maria waved her on, focused on her task. Alara opened the cabinet doors one by one, carefully photographing the cleaning supplies with her phone. Everything looked ordinary at first, until she reached the last cabinet. 3 bottles of industrial-strength cleaner sat in the back, their labels bearing skull and crossbone warnings. She frowned. These should have been locked in the maintenance closet, not stored near food preparation areas. Moving to the pantry, she pulled out the supply logs, comparing dates and quantities. Her finger traced down columns of numbers, stopping at an odd pattern. The industrial cleaner had been ordered monthly in large quantities, but the usage logs showed only minimal amounts being signed out. Where was the rest going? The trash bins behind the kitchen yielded more clues. Hidden beneath food scraps and paper waste, she found empty bottles of the same cleaner, far more than the logs indicated should have been used. She snapped more photos, her hands trembling slightly. "Looking for something specific?" Alara jumped at the voice, nearly dropping her phone. One of the newer housekeepers, Jenny, she thought, stood watching her with raised eyebrows. "Just doing a thorough check," Alara said smoothly. "Mr. Hale wants everything perfect while Miss Aurora is recovering." Jenny's face softened with concern. Poor thing. Such a shame about her heart condition. My cousin had something similar. She launched into a story, but Alara was only half listening, her mind racing. How many people in this house actually knew what was happening to Aurora? By mid-morning, Alara had worked her way through her regular cleaning duties up to the family wing. She knocked softly on Aurora's door before entering with fresh towels. Aurora was sitting up in bed, some color finally returning to her cheeks. She smiled when she saw Ilara. "My guardian angel," she said softly. "That tea you made yesterday helped so much." Ilara set down the towels and moved to check Aurora's water pitcher. "How are you feeling today?" "Better, tired." Aurora sighed, playing with the edge of her silk comforter. Would you sit with me for a minute? Everyone else just hovers and worries. But you're different." Ilara glanced at the door, then sat carefully in the chair beside the bed. Aurora's room was larger than Ilara's entire apartment had been, decorated in soft creams and blues, but there was something lonely about all that space. "Sometimes I think the house is too big," Aurora said, as if reading Ilara's thoughts. "All these rooms, all these people, but no one really sees me. They see the hale fortune, the responsibility, the expectations." Her voice cracked slightly. "Do you know what it's like to always be performing? To know that every choice you make affects hundreds of employees and their families?" Ilara thought about her own family, about Micah. "I know what it's like to carry weight that no one else can see," she said quietly. Aurora's eyes filled with tears. "Exactly. That's exactly it." She reached for Ilara's hand, squeezing it. "Everyone wants something from me. The board members want me to be just like my father. The society mothers want me to marry their sons. The charity organizations want my time and money. But no one asks what I want." "What do you want?" Ilara asked gently. "To make a difference, a real difference, not just writing checks at galas. To help people who really need it." Aurora's face lit up as she spoke, then dimmed. "But first I have to get well. The doctors keep saying it's genetic, but I've never had heart problems before. Neither has anyone in my family. It doesn't make sense." Aurora's voice dropped to a whisper. "Sometimes I think I'm going crazy, but other times I wonder if someone is doing this to me on purpose." Ilara's heart pounded. Should she share her suspicions? But no. Not yet. Not until she had more proof. She couldn't risk causing more stress while Aurora was still recovering. They talked for another hour, about simple things. Favorite books, childhood memories, dreams for the future. Ilara found herself sharing stories about Micah, about her grandmother's healing wisdom, about the garden she hoped to have someday. Aurora listened with genuine interest, asking questions and sharing her own thoughts. By the time Ilara left to continue her duties, something had shifted between them, a friendship forming in the most unlikely of circumstances. That evening, exhausted but determined, Ilara sat cross-legged on her narrow bed in the staff quarters. Her small room was neat but sparse, with just enough space for a bed, dresser, and small desk. The wall above her desk held a photo of Micah, smiling that bright smile she missed every day. She opened her notebook, writing carefully under the warm light of her desk lamp. The industrial cleaner contained trace amounts of heavy metals. She'd researched the chemical composition online. The symptoms matched: gradual build-up, organ damage, symptoms that could mimic heart problems. But how was it being administered? And more importantly, who had access to both the supplies and Aurora's food or personal items? Her list of suspects grew as she wrote: kitchen staff with access to food preparation, housekeepers who handled laundry and personal items, maintenance workers who could access the locked supply closets. The web of possibility seemed to expand with each name she added. The clock on her nightstand showed 11:30 when her eyes began to grow heavy. She tucked the notebook carefully between her mattress and box spring, then changed into her pajamas. As she drifted off to sleep, Micah's photo watched over her, and she made a silent promise. This time, she wouldn't fail. This time, she would save someone before it was too late. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was of Aurora's smile, so genuine when she wasn't trying to be the perfect heiress. Somewhere in this massive house, behind all the wealth and privilege, was a young woman just trying to live authentically. Elara would make sure she got that chance. Dawnlight filtered through the mansion's tall windows as Elara pushed her cleaning cart down the quiet hallway. Her normal morning routine had taken on new purpose. Each task now doubled as a chance to observe, to gather information. She paused near Aurora's suite, pretending to dust a decorative table while watching the personal assistant, Margaret Chen, hurry past with a tray of morning medications. Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she balanced the tray, nearly dropping a pill bottle. Elara noticed how the assistant's usual professional demeanor seemed strained, her movements jerky and uncertain. When Dr. Reynolds stopped to ask about medication timing, Margaret's voice pitched higher than normal. "Everything's on schedule, Doctor. 8 a.m., noon, and 6 p.m., exactly as prescribed." Margaret's fingers twisted the hem of her blazer, a nervous tell Elara had never noticed before. After the doctor left, Elara continued her cleaning route to the kitchen, where lunch preparation was underway. She kept her movements unhurried as she wiped down counters, staying alert to the conversations around her. "Did you update the food log from yesterday?" Sarah, one of the newer maids, asked the head chef. "I did, but Ms. Chen came by later and made some changes." The chef shrugged, focusing on chopping vegetables. "Said there were some mistakes in the timing." Sarah lowered her voice, glancing around before continuing. "That's the third time this week. Kind of strange, don't you think? She never used to care about the kitchen records before Miss Hale got sick." Elara's heart quickened, but she kept her expression neutral as she worked. The pieces were starting to fit together. Altered records, nervous behavior, unlimited access to Aurora's food and medicine. But she needed more proof before taking her suspicions to Victor Hale. At 11:30, Elara knocked softly on Victor's office door. He had been different since their conversation about Micah. More approachable, more willing to listen. When he called for her to enter, she found him standing at the window, worry etched deep in his face. "Mr. Hale, I have some information you might want to hear." Elara kept her voice steady as she shared her observations about Margaret's behavior and the modified food logs. Victor listened intently, his expression growing darker. "You're certain about the records being changed?" "Yes, sir, and there's more." Elara described the assistant's nervous behavior around medications. "I know it might not mean anything, but we can't afford to ignore potential patterns." Victor ran a hand through his silver hair. "Keep watching, Elara. Document everything you notice. I'll have our security team pull the kitchen's camera footage from the past month." During lunch service, Elara volunteered to help in the kitchen, allowing her to stay close to the food preparation area. As she arranged garnishes on Aurora's plate, she caught a distinct metallic smell. Carefully, she touched her tongue to a drop of sauce at the edge of the plate. The bitterness was subtle but unmistakable, similar to the taste Micah had complained about before he got sick. Her hands shook slightly as she carried the tray to Aurora's room. The heiress was sleeping, her face pale against the pillows. Elara set the tray down and adjusted the blankets, her throat tight with worry. She couldn't let history repeat itself. Throughout the afternoon, Elara's anxiety grew. During dinner preparation, she positioned herself near the service entrance, watching as Margaret made several trips to the kitchen, unusual for a personal assistant. Each time, she spoke quietly with one of the newer kitchen staff members. When dinner was served, Elara noticed Aurora barely touched her food, complaining of nausea. As soon as the tray was returned to the kitchen, Elara waited for a moment when no one was watching. With practiced efficiency, she transferred small portions of the leftover food into a plastic container she'd brought from home, tucking it carefully into her apron pocket. Later, in her room, Ilara sealed the container tightly and hid it beneath her bed. The sample might be useful later as evidence. Her grandmother had taught her to trust her instincts about medicine and healing, and every instinct she had was screaming that Aurora was being poisoned. She pulled out her notebook, adding the day's observations to her growing list of suspicious incidents. The pattern was becoming clearer, but she needed solid proof before she could protect Aurora. What she did have was enough to make her certain someone inside this mansion was trying to kill Victor Hale's only daughter. Ilara glanced at her phone. 6:45 p.m. Soon she would need to help with evening turndown service. But first she carefully documented every detail about the food's unusual taste and Margaret's behavior in the kitchen. The truth was hidden somewhere in these small moments, these tiny inconsistencies. She just had to keep watching, keep gathering evidence, and pray she could stop whatever was happening before it was too late. Standing up, she smoothed her uniform and took a deep breath. Another evening of service awaited, another chance to observe and protect. She thought of Micah as she reached for her door handle, how helpless she'd felt watching him slip away. This time would be different. This time, she would save Aurora Hale. The dim light of dawn filtered through Ilara's small window as she carefully arranged the items on her desk. The food samples from last night, testing strips she'd ordered online, and detailed instructions she'd printed from a medical website. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the plastic container. The memory of Micah's last days drove her forward, even as doubt tried to hold her back. "Please let me be wrong," she whispered, but her gut told her otherwise. Following the instructions meticulously, she tested small portions of everything from Aurora's dinner plate. The process was simple enough, designed for concerned parents testing their children's food and water. As she waited for the results, Ilara's mind drifted to her brother. Micah had complained about a metallic taste too, just before the numbness in his hands started. The first test strip began to change color. Ilara's heart stopped. She double-checked the color chart, then tested another sample. Same result. Her throat tightened as she read the words again. Positive for thallium contamination. "Oh, God," she breathed, sinking into her chair. Thallium, the same poison that had been found in Micah's system after it was too late. A toxin so rare that doctors had missed it until the autopsy. And now it was here, in Aurora's food. Ilara's phone showed 5:45 a.m. She had to start her morning duties soon, but her mind was racing. Margaret, Aurora's assistant, had access to the food, but something didn't add up. The woman was nervous, yes, but she also seemed genuinely concerned about Aurora's health. The way she fussed over blankets and adjusted pillows, those weren't the actions of someone trying to harm her employer. She's being used, Ilara realized. Someone else was pulling the strings. During her morning cleaning routine, Ilara kept turning this thought over in her mind. She was dusting the portraits in the main office when she noticed something odd, a file cabinet drawer slightly ajar. As she moved to close it, a stack of papers caught her eye. They were financial documents, partially visible through a clear folder. Ilara hesitated. Snooping through papers wasn't part of her job, but neither was investigating attempted murder. With a quick glance at the door, she carefully pulled out the folder. The documents showed a series of large withdrawals from company accounts, all authorized by Graham Welling, Victor's senior advisor. That wasn't unusual in itself. Welling handled many financial matters. But these transactions were different. They were marked as consulting fees, yet they corresponded exactly with dates when Aurora had been particularly ill. Ilara's fingers grew cold as she dug deeper. There was more. A succession plan for Hale Industries, updated just 3 months ago. If anything happened to both Victor and Aurora, control of the company would pass temporarily to the board of directors, with Graham Welling as acting CEO. The pieces clicked together with terrible clarity. Welling had been with the company for decades, always second in command, always in Victor's shadow. He had the authority to access accounts, influence staff, and manipulate records. And he had everything to gain if Aurora died. "Miss Ward." A voice from the doorway made her jump. It was another maid. "Mr. Welling wants this office prepared for a meeting in 15 minutes. "Of course," Alara said, quickly returning the papers to their exact position. Just finishing up the dusting. Her heart pounded as she gathered her cleaning supplies. Graham Welling, the man who attended every family event, who had known Aurora since she was a child, who Victor trusted completely, was trying to kill his best friend's daughter. As she hurried from the office, Alara felt the weight of this knowledge pressing down on her. She needed proof that would stand up to scrutiny. She needed a way to protect Aurora. And she needed to be very, very careful, because Graham Welling had just become the most dangerous person in the mansion. Through her racing thoughts, one truth became crystal clear. The man who sat in board meetings and ate dinner with the family was orchestrating everything. Every accident, every mysterious illness, every careful manipulation led back to him. Graham Welling had spent years building his reputation as Victor's most trusted advisor, and now he was using that trust to destroy the Hale family from within. Alara clutched her cleaning cart tighter, her knuckles white against the handle. She thought of Micah, of how the doctors had dismissed their concerns until it was too late. She thought of Aurora, fighting for her life, while the man responsible probably sat in meetings planning her death. The familiar ache of helplessness threatened to overwhelm her, but she pushed it back. Not this time. This time, she knew what she was dealing with. This time, she had a chance to stop it before another life was lost. But first, she needed to figure out how to prove what she'd discovered, before Graham Welling realized she was onto him. The morning sun cast long shadows through the mansion windows as Alara made her way to Victor Hale's private study. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the folder containing her evidence, but her resolve remained firm. She had spent the early hours organizing everything she'd discovered, the altered food logs, copies of the suspicious withdrawals, and her notes about the thallium poisoning. The guard outside Victor's study nodded at her, already familiar with her presence after the past few days. Inside, Victor sat at his massive desk, looking exhausted but alert. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept much. "Mr. Hale," Alara said softly, closing the door behind her. "I need to show you something important." Victor looked up, his expression softening slightly at the sight of her. "What have you found?" Alara spread the documents across his desk carefully, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "These are food logs from the kitchen, sir. See these alterations?" She pointed to several entries where times and items had been clearly modified. "And here are financial records showing large withdrawals, all authorized by Mr. Welling." Victor leaned forward, his face growing increasingly pale as he examined each piece of evidence. "These dates," he muttered. "They align perfectly with Aurora's worst episodes." "There's more," Alara continued, showing him the succession documents. "If anything happens to both you and Aurora, Mr. Welling would temporarily take control of everything." Victor's hands clenched into fists as he processed the information. The betrayal of his oldest friend and advisor seemed to physically pain him. "Graham," he whispered, his voice thick with anger and disbelief. "All these years—" "I believe he's been manipulating Margaret, Aurora's assistant, to unknowingly deliver the poison," Alara explained. "The woman is innocent. She's just another pawn in his scheme." Victor stood abruptly, pacing the study. "I trusted him with everything. He's been to every holiday dinner, every family celebration. He held Aurora when she was a baby." His voice cracked slightly before hardening with resolve. I want him watched. Every move, every conversation. Throughout the day, Victor maintained his usual routine, but Alara noticed how he lingered in meetings with Graham, studying his old friend's face with new eyes. During lunch, Victor positioned himself to observe Graham's interactions with staff. The change was subtle. Victor was too skilled a businessman to show his hand, but it was there. Graham, however, was equally observant. By mid-afternoon, Alara saw him watching Victor with growing suspicion. His normally smooth demeanor showed tiny cracks, a slightly too tight smile, a nervous adjustment of his tie, the way his eyes darted around rooms before entering them. Meanwhile, Alara focused on saving Aurora. In her small quarters, she carefully measured out ingredients for the chelation therapy her grandmother had taught her years ago. The mixture included cilantro, known for its natural metal-binding properties, along with carefully selected supplements to support the body's natural detoxification processes. "Please work," she whispered as she stirred the herbs into a tea. Her hands moved with practiced precision, measuring each ingredient exactly as her grandmother had shown her. The familiar scent of the herbs brought back memories of watching the older woman tend to sick neighbors, never turning anyone away who needed help. Evening approached, and Alara's anxiety grew as she prepared to administer the first dose. She had explained her plan to Victor earlier, and though skeptical, he had given his permission. They were running out of options, and conventional medicine wasn't helping. Aurora lay in her bed, her skin ashen and her breathing shallow. Alara sat beside her, gently lifting her head to help her drink the tea. "Small sips," she murmured, supporting Aurora's neck. "That's it. Just a little more." For several long minutes, nothing happened. Alara held Aurora's hand, monitoring her pulse and watching her face for any sign of change. The room was quiet except for the steady beep of medical equipment and the soft sound of breathing. Then, slowly, Aurora's eyelids began to flutter. Her fingers twitched in Alara's grip, and her chest rose with a deeper breath. Her eyes opened, focusing on Alara's face with more clarity than she'd shown in days. "I trust you," Aurora whispered, the words barely audible but filled with certainty. A small smile touched her lips before her eyes drifted closed again, but this time her sleep seemed more natural, less like unconsciousness. Alara squeezed Aurora's hand gently, hope blooming in her chest. The treatment was working. Now they just needed time. Time to help Aurora heal, and time to stop Graham before he realized his plan was failing. She watched as Aurora's color slowly improved, her breathing becoming stronger and more regular. The medical monitors showed subtle but positive changes in her vital signs. For the first time since this nightmare began, Alara felt truly confident they could save her. Victor appeared in the doorway, his face a mix of hope and worry as he observed his daughter's peaceful rest. "Any change?" he asked softly. Alara nodded, careful not to disturb Aurora. "The chelation therapy seems to be working. Her body is starting to fight back against the poison." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "But Mr. Hale, we need to be extremely careful now. When Mr. Welling realizes she's improving—" "I know," Victor said grimly. "We need to protect her while we gather enough evidence to stop him permanently." He moved to his daughter's bedside, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Thank you, Alara, for everything." Aurora stirred slightly in her sleep, her face turning toward her father's touch. The sight brought tears to Alara's eyes. Here was the proof that love and truth could overcome even the most carefully planned evil. Aurora's whispered words of trust echoed in her mind, strengthening her determination to see this through to the end. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Aurora's room, casting a warm glow across her sleeping form. Alara entered quietly with fresh towels, but stopped short when she saw the change in her patient. Aurora's skin had lost its sickly pallor, replaced by a healthy pink flush. Her breathing was deep and regular, no longer the shallow gasps of previous days. As if sensing Alara's presence, Aurora's eyes fluttered open. "Good morning," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in days. She pushed herself up to sitting position without assistance, something that would have been impossible yesterday. "Aurora!" Alara rushed to her side, quickly checking her vital signs. "How are you feeling?" "Better. Much better." Aurora smiled, flexing her fingers. "The heaviness is gone. I can actually think clearly." The door burst open as Dr. Matthews strode in for his morning checkup, followed by 2 nurses. He stopped abruptly, staring at his patient in disbelief. "Miss Hale, this is remarkable." He quickly began examining her, checking her pulse, blood pressure, and oxygen levels. With each test, his eyebrows rose higher. "These readings," he muttered, shaking his head. "They're almost normal. Yesterday you were barely conscious, and now—" Victor appeared in the doorway, his usual commanding presence softened by exhaustion and worry. When he saw Aurora sitting up and alert, his carefully maintained composure cracked. "Princess," he whispered, using her childhood nickname. "Daddy." Aurora reached out to him, tears welling in her eyes. Victor crossed the room in 3 long strides, gathering his daughter in his arms. His shoulders shook as he held her, all pretense of stoic strength forgotten. When he finally pulled back, his cheeks were wet. He turned to Alara, who was trying to slip quietly from the room. "Wait," he called out. Before she could react, he had wrapped her in a fierce hug. "Thank you," he whispered hoarsely. "Thank you for saving my little girl." Alara felt her own eyes filling with tears as she returned the embrace. For a moment, all the barriers of class and position fell away, leaving just 2 people united in their care for Aurora. The morning passed in a flurry of medical tests and excited conversations. Doctors came and went, marveling at Aurora's improvement while trying to explain it in scientific terms. Alara continued her regular duties, but kept checking in whenever she could, bringing fresh tea and gentle encouragement. As evening approached, however, the atmosphere in the mansion shifted. Alara felt it as she walked the halls, a tension in the air, like the pressure before a storm. She was carrying fresh linens down the back stairwell after dinner, when a shadow fell across the steps above her. "Miss Ward." Graham Welling's voice was smooth as silk and cold as ice. "Just the person I wanted to see." Alara turned slowly, her heart pounding. Graham stood at the top of the stairs, his tall frame blocking the light from the hallway. His face wore its usual pleasant expression, but his eyes were hard. "You've been quite the hero lately," he said, descending the stairs with measured steps. The devoted maid, saving the young heiress with her grandmother's remedies, was it? His lip curled slightly on the last words. "I'm just doing my job, Mr. Welling," Alara said carefully, fighting to keep her voice steady. "No," he said softly, moving closer. "You're interfering, poking your nose where it doesn't belong, finding things that should stay hidden." Alara backed away, but found herself against the wall. Graham leaned in, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice? That I wouldn't see you sneaking around, checking records, asking questions?" His pleasant mask slipped, revealing something ugly beneath. "I've worked too hard and too long to let some nosy maid ruin everything." "I don't know what you're talking about," Alara said, but her voice shook. "Oh, I think you do." He smiled, and it was terrible to see. Just like you'll understand when I tell you that the IV bag waiting for Aurora's evening treatment has been specially prepared. A final dose, you might say. And there's nothing you can do about it, because in about 5 minutes, you won't even be in this house anymore. Before Alara could respond, heavy footsteps sounded in the hallway above. Graham's face instantly transformed back into its usual professional mask as 2 security guards appeared. "Ah, perfect timing," he said smoothly. "Gentlemen, I'm afraid we have a situation. While checking the security footage, I discovered Miss Ward here stealing items from Miss Hale's room." He held up a small jewelry box, and Alara's stomach dropped. She had never seen it before, but she knew exactly what was happening. "That's not true," she protested, but Graham spoke over her. "I've already shown the footage to Mr. Hale's head of security. Miss Ward, you're terminated, effective immediately. These officers will escort you from the property." "Please," Alara begged as the guards took her arms. "You don't understand. Aurora's in danger. He's going to—" "That's enough." Graham cut her off sharply. To the guards, he added, "Please remove her. Any further accusations will be treated as slander." Alara struggled to think as she was led through the service entrance and out into the cooling evening air. She had to do something, had to stop what was about to happen. But she was powerless as the gates closed behind her with a final sounding clang. From an upstairs window she heard a sudden commotion. A cry for help. Aurora's voice, weak but distinct. I can't breathe." Alara stood helplessly on the wrong side of the fence as medical alarms began to sound inside the mansion, knowing that the poison was already at work and she could no longer reach its victim. The iron gates of the Hale mansion loomed behind Alara as she sank onto a stone bench just outside the property. Her few belongings, a change of clothes, some toiletries, and her grandmother's healing journal, sat beside her in a white plastic shopping bag. The night air bit through her thin uniform dress, but she barely noticed the cold. All she could feel was the weight of failure pressing down on her chest. Security lights cast long shadows across the manicured lawn while distant sirens wailed, presumably rushing toward the mansion. Alara wrapped her arms around herself, rocking slightly as tears slid down her cheeks. First Micah, now Aurora. Once again, she had recognized the danger too late, had failed to save someone in her care. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, though whether to Micah or Aurora she wasn't sure. Maybe both. Minutes stretched into an hour as she sat there, watching ambulances arrive and depart through the gates. Each flash of red and blue lights felt like an accusation. She could picture Graham inside, smoothly explaining away any suspicions, while Aurora fought for her life against whatever poison he had added to her IV. Alara's hand drifted to her neck, where Micah's silver leaf pendant hung on its delicate chain. It was the last gift he had given her, pressed into her palm the night before he died. The metal was warm against her skin as she traced its familiar outline. "You always were the strong one," Micah had told her that night, his voice barely above a whisper. "Promise me you won't give up, no matter how hard things get. The world needs people like you, people who keep fighting for what's right." The memory of his words cut through her fog of despair. Alara sat up straighter, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. What was she doing out here feeling sorry for herself while Aurora needed help? "You're right, Micah," she said softly. "I can't give up now." She stood, shouldering her plastic bag. The main entrance was out of the question. Graham would have alerted security to watch for her. But after months of working in the mansion, she knew other ways in. The laundry entrance, for instance, was often left unlocked for late-night deliveries. Moving quietly through the shadows, Alara made her way around the perimeter of the property. Her sensible work shoes barely made a sound on the damp grass as she approached the service area. The laundry entrance was set below ground level, accessible by a short flight of concrete steps. Her heart pounded as she descended those steps, praying the door would be unlocked. She had to get inside, had to find proof of what Graham was doing before it was too late. Micah's pendant seemed to pulse with warmth against her skin, giving her courage as she reached for the handle. Ilara drew a deep breath. Whether through this door or another way, she would find a way back in. She would not fail again. The door handle turned with a quiet click, and Ilara's breath caught in her throat. She slipped inside the dimly lit laundry hall, her heart hammering against her ribs. The familiar scent of detergent and fabric softener filled her nostrils as she pressed herself against the wall, listening intently for any movement. Footsteps echoed from around the corner. Ilara quickly ducked behind, a tall cart piled high with fresh linens, making herself as small as possible. 2 night shift workers passed by, their conversation drifting through the quiet space. "Did you hear about Miss Hale?" One whispered. "Another episode. They called the ambulance again. 3rd time this week." The other replied, "Poor thing. They say it's her heart." Ilara waited until their voices faded before emerging from her hiding spot. She knew better. It wasn't Aurora's heart at all, but Graham's calculated poison slowly taking her life. Time was running out. The security office was 2 floors up, near the west wing where she used to clean every Tuesday morning. Ilara moved carefully through the service corridors she knew so well, freezing at every sound. Each step felt like walking through a minefield, but her determination drove her forward. When she reached the security office door, she paused, remembering the passcode system. During her cleaning duties, she'd noticed the pattern. They changed it every Sunday night, rotating through a sequence of numbers based on the calendar week. Today was Thursday of week 42, which meant... Ilara's fingers hovered over the keypad. 4219. The lock clicked open, and she released the breath she'd been holding. Inside, the office was dark, except for the blue glow of multiple monitors showing different areas of the mansion. She slipped into the chair, her hands shaking as she accessed the video archive. The system was simple. She'd watched the security guards use it countless times while dusting their desks. Finding footage from earlier that evening, she focused on the hallway outside Aurora's room. The timestamp read 7:32 p.m. when Graham appeared on screen, carrying an IV bag. Ilara leaned closer, her heart racing as she watched him glance furtively down the hall before entering Aurora's room. The camera angle shifted to show him beside Aurora's bed, removing something from his pocket, a syringe. With practiced movements, he injected its contents into the IV bag, then hung it on the stand. "Got you," Ilara whispered, her hands trembling as she fumbled in her pocket for the flash drive she always carried, a habit from helping her brother back up his college assignments. She plugged it in, copying the damning footage as quickly as she could. A noise in the hallway made her freeze. Footsteps approached, then passed by. Ilara's fingers flew across the keyboard, making sure she had the crucial evidence. When the file transfer completed, she carefully erased any trace of her presence from the system. Standing in the dark office, clutching the flash drive like a lifeline, Ilara pulled out her phone. She had kept Victor's number from when he had asked her to update him on Aurora's condition. With shaking fingers, she typed, "I have proof. Check your office now." Tucking both phone and flash drive securely in her pocket, Ilara eased the office door open. The master suite was on the 3rd floor, and she needed to warn Victor in person. There was too much at stake to trust technology alone. She moved through the familiar corridors like a shadow, her years of invisible service now serving a greater purpose. Every corner she turned, every step she took, brought her closer to exposing Graham's deadly scheme. Micah's pendant seemed to pulse against her skin, reminding her that this time she wouldn't fail. This time she would save someone before it was too late. The distant sound of voices made her pause. Somewhere above, Graham was likely still orchestrating his plan, unaware that his careful facade was about to crumble. Elara pressed on, her determination growing stronger with each step toward the master suite. The proof was secure in her pocket, and soon, very soon, the truth would finally come to light. Victor Hale sat in his darkened office, rubbing his temples as he stared at financial reports. The soft glow of his desk lamp cast long shadows across the mahogany walls. His phone buzzed, drawing his attention away from the endless columns of numbers. Reading Elara's message, his heart began to race. He immediately turned to his computer, hands steadied despite his growing anxiety. The video file was there, just as she'd promised, waiting in his inbox. As the footage began to play, Victor's face hardened with each passing second. The image of Graham, his trusted advisor of 20 years, deliberately poisoning his daughter's IV bag, was undeniable. "Dear God," he whispered, his fingers gripping the edge of his desk until his knuckles turned white. All those years of trust, of sharing business decisions and family celebrations, it had all been a facade. A loud thump from downstairs broke through his shock. Victor rose from his chair, moving swiftly toward his office door. As he reached the grand staircase, he heard more commotion, the sound of wheels rolling across marble floors and hurried footsteps. Looking down from the landing, Victor saw Graham rushing toward the main entrance, pulling 2 large suitcases behind him. Even from above, Victor could see the sweat beading on his advisor's forehead, the nervous energy radiating from his usually composed demeanor. "Graham!" Victor's voice boomed through the foyer, causing the other man to freeze mid-step. At that same moment, Elara emerged from a side corridor, slightly out of breath. She looked up at Victor, then at Graham, her hand instinctively clutching the flash drive in her pocket. Graham's practiced smile appeared, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Victor, I was just heading out for an urgent meeting in Chicago. The Jensen merger, you remember?" "The only place you're going is to jail," Victor said, his voice cold as he descended the stairs. "I've seen the security footage." Graham's facade cracked slightly, but he maintained his composure. "What security footage? Victor, surely you're not listening to the accusations of a maid." He spat the last word, glaring at Elara. Elara stepped forward, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I have proof of you poisoning Miss Aurora's IV bag. It's all here." She held up the flash drive. Through the grand windows, red and blue lights began flashing, illuminating the driveway. Officer Jane Miles had responded to Victor's emergency call, arriving with 2 patrol cars. Graham's polished exterior finally shattered. He lunged toward the door, abandoning his suitcases, but Victor moved faster. Years of morning workouts paid off as he caught Graham's arm, wrestling him back from the entrance just as Officer Miles burst in with her team. "Let go of me!" Graham snarled, his carefully cultivated accent slipping as his true nature emerged. "You entitled bastard! You think you deserve all this?" He gestured wildly at the mansion around them. 20 years I've watched you and your precious family live like royalty while I did all the real work." Officer Miles quickly took control, her movements efficient as she handcuffed Graham. "Mr. Welling, you're under arrest for attempted murder and corporate espionage. You have the right to remain silent." But Graham wasn't finished, his face contorted with decades of suppressed rage as officers restrained him. "You were nothing when your father started this company. Nothing. I was the one who built it into what it is today. I deserved to inherit it all, not your spoiled daughter." "That's enough," Officer Miles said firmly, tightening the handcuffs. Graham turned his venomous gaze to Elara. "And you're just another nobody who should have stayed invisible. You'll regret this, I promise you that." "The only regret here is mine," Victor said quietly. "For not seeing who you really were all these years." As the officers led Graham towards the door, he continued shouting threats and insults, his words echoing through the marble foyer. The mask of refinement had completely fallen away, revealing the bitter, jealous man who had nearly killed an innocent woman for profit. Victor watched as his former friend was escorted out, each threat and accusation hitting him like physical blows. The weight of his trust in Graham, and how that trust had nearly cost him his daughter's life, pressed down on his shoulders. Finally, he turned to Alara, who stood quietly nearby, still holding the flash drive. Their eyes met, and in that moment, all the doubt and suspicion he'd harbored toward her seemed foolish and shallow. Here was someone who had risked everything, her job, her safety, her reputation, to save his daughter, while the man he'd trusted for decades had been slowly killing her. The look he gave her held both profound relief and deep guilt. Relief that she had succeeded in exposing the truth, and guilt for having doubted her integrity simply because of her position. No words were needed, his expression said it all. The flashing lights continued to pulse through the windows as police cars pulled away, taking Graham to face justice for his crimes. In the grand foyer, now quiet except for the distant sound of sirens fading into the night, Victor and Alara stood in shared silence, both processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. As soon as Graham was taken away, Alara's mind snapped back to the urgent matter at hand. "The IV!" she gasped, already running towards the stairs. Victor immediately understood, his face paling as he followed her, taking the marble steps 2 at a time. They burst into Aurora's suite, startling the night nurse who was adjusting monitoring equipment. The room's soft lighting couldn't hide Aurora's deteriorating condition. Her skin had taken on a greyish tinge, and her breathing was becoming more labored with each passing minute. "We need to remove that IV right now," Alara said, her voice firm but controlled as she moved to Aurora's bedside. The nurse started to protest, but Victor cut her off. "Do exactly as she says," he commanded, his authoritative tone brooking no argument. The nurse stepped back, bewildered but compliant. Alara's hands moved with practiced precision, gained from years of watching her grandmother treat the sick in their community. She carefully removed the contaminated IV line, her heart aching at how cold Aurora's skin felt beneath her fingers. Working quickly, she flushed the port with fresh saline solution she'd prepared earlier, ensuring no trace of Graham's poison remained. From her apron pocket, she withdrew a small bottle containing the last dose of her grandmother's antidote, a carefully crafted mixture of natural chelating agents and healing herbs. Her hands trembled slightly as she prepared the medicine, aware that everything hinged on this moment. "Hold on, Aurora," she whispered, administering the antidote through the cleaned line. "Just hold on a little longer." The next few minutes were agonizing. Aurora's breathing became even more labored, each breath a visible struggle. Victor knelt beside the bed, grasping his daughter's hand, his usual commanding presence replaced by the desperate worry of a father watching his child fight for life. "Please," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Please, God, don't take her from me." Alara stood vigilant, one hand resting lightly on Aurora's shoulder, silently willing her own strength into the struggling woman. The monitors beeped steadily, marking each precious heartbeat. Outside in the hallway, word had spread quickly. Staff members began gathering, housekeepers, kitchen workers, gardeners, security personnel, all drawn by concern for Aurora and curiosity about the unfolding drama. Their whispered conversations created a soft backdrop of murmurs. Is it true? Graham tried to kill her? The maid figured it out. She knew when all the doctors were wrong. Gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, Aurora's breathing began to ease. The harsh, rattling gasps smoothed into more regular breaths. Color crept back into her face, replacing the sickly grey with a healthier pink. The monitoring equipment showed strengthening vital signs. Victor's shoulders shook with silent sobs of relief. He pressed his daughter's hand to his forehead, years of careful composure forgotten in this moment of raw emotion. "Thank you," he said hoarsely, looking up at Alara through tear-filled eyes. "Thank you for saving my little girl." The gathered staff watched in amazement. Many had worked in the mansion for years, seeing Alara as just another quiet member of the housekeeping team. Now they saw her differently, the humble maid who had uncovered a murderous plot and saved the heiress when everyone else had failed. "I always knew there was something special about that girl," Mrs. Chen, the head housekeeper, whispered to the others. "So observant, so careful with everything she does." Aurora stirred on the bed, her eyelids fluttering. The room fell silent, everyone holding their breath. Slowly her eyes opened, focusing first on her father, then shifting to Alara. Despite her weakness, she managed to lift her hand, reaching for Alara's. Their fingers intertwined, and a soft smile touched Aurora's pale lips. "You saved me again," she whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with gratitude. Alara returned the gentle pressure of Aurora's hand, her own eyes filling with tears. This time, unlike with her brother Micah, she had recognized the signs in time. This time, she had been able to stop the poison before it was too late. This time, she had saved a life. The mansion staff crowded in the doorway collectively released a held breath, their whispers now tinged with awe and admiration. The scene before them spoke of more than just a medical recovery. It represented barriers broken, preconceptions shattered, and lives forever changed by one person's courage to trust her instincts and fight for what she knew was right. Dawn painted the sky in gentle strokes of pink and gold, casting soft shadows across the manicured grounds of the Hale estate. Inside the mansion, a profound sense of peace had settled over the halls that just hours ago had been filled with chaos and fear. Alara stood at the window of the staff break room, warming her hands on a cup of chamomile tea. She'd stayed up most of the night, monitoring Aurora, only leaving when she was certain her patient was sleeping soundly. The events of the past days felt almost dreamlike in the quiet morning light. A soft knock at the door drew her attention. Thomas, Victor's personal assistant, stood in the doorway. "Mr. Hale would like to see you in his study when you're ready." Alara nodded, straightening her uniform. Despite everything that had happened, she still felt the ingrained need to appear professional. She made her way through the mansion's corridors, noting how different everything looked in the morning light. Lighter somehow, as if a dark cloud had lifted from the house. The door to Victor's study was already open when she arrived. He sat behind his massive oak desk, looking tired but relieved. The usual stern set of his shoulders had softened. "Please come in, Alara," he said, rising to greet her. "And please, sit down." She settled into one of the leather chairs facing his desk, hands folded in her lap. Victor remained standing, pacing slightly before turning to face her. "First, I need to say something that's long overdue," he began, his voice heavy with emotion. "I owe you and your community a profound apology." Alara sat quietly, watching as this powerful man struggled to find the right words. "When I learned about the toxic dumping scandal, I told myself it wasn't my fault, that I'd been deceived by the shell company, that I couldn't have known." He shook his head. "But the truth is, I should have looked closer. I should have investigated more thoroughly. Your brother Micah." His voice caught. His death, and the illness of so many others, might have been prevented if I'd done my duty as a business leader. Tears pricked at Alara's eyes as she thought of Micah, but she remained silent, letting Victor continue. "I can't change the past," he said, moving to sit behind his desk again. "But I can work to make things right." He pulled out a folder and opened it. "I've already set in motion a complete environmental cleanup of the affected areas. We're going to restore the land, properly this time, no matter the cost." Alara's hands trembled slightly in her lap. That would mean so much to the community." "There's more," Victor continued. "I'm establishing a trust fund for medical care for anyone affected by the contamination. And..." He paused, his voice softening. "I'm creating a scholarship fund in Micah's name. The Micah Ward Memorial Scholarship will provide full university education for promising students from your neighborhood who want to study environmental science or medicine." The tears Alara had been holding back spilled over. She thought of how Micah had always wanted to be a doctor, how he'd dreamed of helping others even as his own health failed. "He would have loved that," she whispered. Victor nodded, clearly moved himself. "There's one more thing, Alara." He leaned forward, clasping his hands on the desk. "I want you to stay on here at the estate, not as a maid, but in a new position. I'd like you to be Aurora's wellness consultant and health advocate." Alara blinked in surprise. I don't understand." "You saw what others missed. You trusted your instincts and your knowledge when everyone else was wrong. Aurora trusts you, and so do I." He smiled slightly. "The position comes with a substantial salary increase, of course, and a suite in the family wing of the house. But I don't have formal medical training," Alara protested weakly. "Your grandmother's knowledge combined with your natural intuition and observational skills proved more valuable than a dozen medical degrees." Victor replied, "We can arrange for any additional certification you'd like to pursue, but your gift for healing is something that can't be taught in any school." Alara sat in stunned silence, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being offered. She thought of Micah again, of his last words to her about not giving up, about using her gifts to help others. She thought of Aurora and the bond they'd formed through this ordeal. "Yes," she said finally, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I'd be honored to stay." Victor's face broke into a genuine smile, perhaps the first she'd ever seen from him. He stood and extended his hand across the desk. As Alara rose to shake it, tears of gratitude streaming down her face, she felt the weight of the past beginning to lift. In saving Aurora's life, she had found a way to honor Micah's memory and create something positive from their family's tragedy. Through the study windows, the morning sun had fully risen, bathing the room in warm, golden light. It felt like a new beginning, not just for Alara, but for everyone whose lives had been touched by the events of the past few days. In that moment of quiet joy, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. The garden sparkled in the late afternoon sunlight, decorated with simple white roses and soft ivory ribbons. Small tables dotted the manicured lawn, each adorned with delicate crystal vases filled with fresh flowers. The intimate gathering of about 30 people created a warm atmosphere of celebration and gratitude. Alara stood near the edge of the gathering, still adjusting to her new role. She wore a lovely pale blue dress, a gift from Aurora, instead of her former maid's uniform. The change in clothing reflected the deeper transformation in her life over the past week. She watched as Aurora, supported by her father's steady arm, made her way carefully to the small podium set up on the garden terrace. Though still recovering, Aurora's natural grace showed through in every movement. Her color had returned to normal, and her eyes sparkled with renewed life. The gentle murmur of conversation died down as Aurora cleared her throat to speak. "A week ago, I wasn't sure I would be standing here," she began, her voice clear and strong despite her recent ordeal. "The doctors couldn't explain what was happening to me. My body was failing, and I felt more alone than I ever had in my life." She paused, her eyes finding Alara in the crowd. "But then someone saw me, truly saw me, perhaps for the first time in my life. Not as an heiress, not as Victor Hale's daughter, but as a human being in need of help." Aurora's voice wavered slightly with emotion. "Alara Ward didn't just save my life with her knowledge of healing herbs and her grandmother's wisdom. She saved my spirit by showing me that genuine kindness still exists in this world, that sometimes the most precious gifts come from unexpected places." Tears glistened in Aurora's eyes as she continued. "In the darkest moments of my illness, Alara sat with me, held my hand, and shared stories about her brother Micah. She helped me understand that wealth and status mean nothing compared to the richness of real human connection. She risked everything, her job, her reputation, even her own safety, to save someone she barely knew." Victor stepped forward then, placing a supportive hand on his daughter's shoulder. "If I may add something," he said, his usually commanding voice softened by emotion. "We nearly made a terrible mistake. In our pride and prejudice, we almost overlooked the very person God sent to save our family." He turned to address the gathered crowd directly. "I believe with all my heart that God sent us an angel, and we nearly overlooked her because she wore a maid's uniform instead of wings." His words brought murmurs of agreement from the assembled guests and staff members. "Alara," he called out, extending his hand in invitation, "would you please join us?" Feeling self-conscious but deeply moved, Alara made her way through the crowd to join Aurora and Victor on the terrace. The applause that followed was genuine and warm, bringing a blush to her cheeks. When the clapping subsided, Alara spoke softly into the microphone, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't feel like a hero," she said honestly. "I simply did what anyone should do when they see someone suffering. I tried to help. My grandmother always taught me that true healing comes from love and compassion, not from status or wealth." She touched the silver leaf necklace at her throat, drawing strength from Micah's memory. "My brother Micah used to say that every person has value, regardless of their position in life. He believed in treating everyone with kindness and respect. I'd like to think that he would be proud to see us all here today, celebrating not just Aurora's recovery, but the breaking down of barriers that too often keep us apart." Aurora reached out and took Alara's hand, squeezing it gently. Victor placed his hand over both of theirs, creating a powerful image of unity and reconciliation. The gathered crowd burst into applause once more, many wiping away tears at the touching scene. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the garden, the three of them stood together. No longer employer and employee, no longer separated by social status or wealth, but united as family. Alara felt the last lingering wounds from her past beginning to heal. The ache of losing Micah would never completely disappear, but she had found a new purpose, a new family, and a new hope for the future. The evening continued with quiet celebration, gentle laughter, and shared stories. House staff mingled freely with guests, the usual social barriers dissolved by the example set at the podium. Aurora remained close to Alara, their friendship now deeper than ever, while Victor moved among his guests with a new humility and warmth. As twilight settled over the garden, transforming the white roses into silver shadows, Alara looked around at the scene before her. She saw healing happening not just in Aurora's recovered health, but in the connections being formed, the prejudices being overcome, and the walls coming down between people who might never have spoken to each other before. In that moment, standing between Aurora and Victor, surrounded by warmth and acceptance, Alara felt complete. She had honored Micah's memory by saving Aurora's life. But more than that, she had helped create something beautiful from tragedy, a reminder that love, compassion, and kindness could bridge any divide and heal any wound. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, casting warm, golden squares across the marble countertops. Ilara moved with practiced grace among the breakfast dishes from the previous evening's celebration, her hands working steadily as she placed crystal glasses into soapy water. The familiar routine felt different now, lighter somehow. Around her, the kitchen staff bustled about their morning tasks, but the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Where there had once been polite distance, there were now warm smiles and friendly chatter. Mrs. Peterson, the head cook who had barely spoken 2 words to her before, touched Ilara's arm as she passed. "Those herbs you suggested for my arthritis are working wonders, dear," she said warmly. "I slept through the night for the first time in months." Ilara smiled, touched by the connection. "I'm so glad. My grandmother always said nature provides the best medicine if we know where to look." As she wiped down the last counter, soft footsteps approached from the hallway. Aurora appeared in the doorway, leaning slightly on a wooden cane but looking stronger than she had in weeks. Her complexion had returned to its natural glow, though she still moved carefully. "There you are," Aurora said, smiling shyly. "Would you walk with me in the garden? The morning air would do us both good." Ilara quickly dried her hands. "Of course. Are you sure you're up for it?" "Doctor's orders, remember. And you're my wellness consultant now. You tell me I need to build my strength back gradually." They made their way outside, taking the stone pathway that wound through beds of late-blooming flowers. Aurora's pace was slow but steady, her cane clicking softly against the path. "How are you feeling about all the changes?" Aurora asked as they walked. "It must feel strange, going from cleaning rooms to having your own office next to mine." Ilara nodded thoughtfully. "It does feel different, but good different, like I can finally use my knowledge to help people the way I've always wanted to." "Father says the board is being completely restructured now that Graham's gone," Aurora continued. "No more yes-men or old guard protecting their interests. He wants people who'll prioritize ethics over profits." They paused near a rose trellis, where Aurora took a moment to catch her breath. As they stood there, Victor appeared on the path, his face brightening when he saw them. "I thought I might find you both out here," he said, joining them. "Ilara, I wanted to let you know. I met with the environmental lawyers this morning. We're moving forward with full remediation of your old neighborhood." Ilara's heart swelled with emotion. "Really?" Victor nodded solemnly. "The compensation checks are being prepared for all affected families. It won't make up for what happened, but it's a start. We're also setting up a health monitoring program for residents." They continued walking together, reaching the central fountain where water sparkled in the morning light. Victor placed a gentle hand on Ilara's shoulder. "Thank you," he said softly, "for showing us what real integrity looks like." Tears pricked at Ilara's eyes as she looked up at the sky, thinking of Micah. The weight she'd carried since his death felt lighter somehow, as if sharing her pain had helped heal it. "Micah would be proud," she whispered, touching her silver leaf necklace. "For the first time since losing him, I really believe that." The fountain bubbled peacefully beside them as they stood together, 3 people whose lives had been forever changed by trust, compassion, and the courage to do what was right. In that moment, Ilara's heart felt lighter than it had in years. That afternoon, sunlight filtered through the small window of Ilara's staff quarters as she carefully folded her uniforms for the last time. Each black dress held memories, some bitter, some sweet, of her time as a maid in the Hale mansion. She tucked them into a cardboard box alongside her few personal items: 3 paperback novels, a worn journal filled with her grandmother's herbal recipes, and the silver photo frame containing Micah's last Christmas photo. Her fingers lingered on the simple cotton bedspread she'd slept under for the past 2 years. This tiny room had been her sanctuary, a place where she could shed the invisible cloak she wore throughout the mansion. Now everything was different. Gathering her boxes, just 2 in total, Elara took one final look around the sparse room. The bare walls and standard-issue furniture held an unexpected warmth in her memory. This had been her starting point, the place where she'd found her strength. As she walked through the mansion's polished halls, her footsteps echoed differently. Each corner held a story. The service stairwell where Graham had threatened her, the window seat where she'd often paused to gather her thoughts during long shifts. She stopped at the large front window overlooking the gates, her heart tightening at the memory of that desperate night when she'd sat outside, cold and defeated, believing she had failed both Micah and Aurora. "I almost gave up right there," she whispered to herself, touching the cool glass. Now the wrought-iron gates stood as a reminder of how far she'd come, how much had changed since that dark moment. Making her way to the east, wing. Elara approached her new wellness suite near Aurora's room. Victor had insisted on completely renovating the space, turning what was once a storage area into a bright, welcoming sanctuary. As she reached for the door handle, voices whispered on the other side. The door swung open to reveal Aurora, still using her cane but standing proudly, surrounded by mansion staff members. On a beautiful wooden desk sat an enormous welcome basket, overflowing with carefully chosen items. "Surprise!" they called out in unison, their faces bright with genuine warmth. Tears welled in Elara's eyes as she set down her boxes. The basket contained dozens of glass jars filled with dried herbs, new notebooks bound in soft leather, and reference books on natural medicine. But what caught her eye immediately was a framed photograph placed carefully at the center. With trembling hands, she lifted it out. There was Micah, his bright smile frozen in time, restored from the water-damaged photo she'd once shown Victor while explaining her brother's story. The image was crystal clear now, professionally restored and protected behind glass. Victor had it done, Aurora explained softly. He said everyone should have a clear picture of the people they love. Mrs. Peterson stepped forward, speaking for the group. "You've changed this place, Elara, not just by saving Aurora, but by seeing us, really seeing us. You treated everyone with kindness, whether they were serving or being served. It made a difference." The head gardener nodded in agreement. "You asked about our families, remembered our birthdays, made us feel like people, not just staff numbers." One by one, they shared similar sentiments, how her quiet strength had inspired them, how her compassion had created ripples of change throughout the mansion's hierarchy. Even Thomas, the usually stoic security guard, spoke about how she'd helped his daughter with natural remedies for anxiety. As the group gradually dispersed, leaving her to settle in, Elara stood in the center of her new space. The evening sun painted the walls a warm gold, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. Her herbs would soon fill the custom shelving unit, her books would line the desk, and Micah's smiling face would watch over it all. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her new reality settle around her shoulders like a comfortable shawl. No longer was she the invisible maid, moving silently through the mansion's shadows. She was Elara Ward, wellness consultant, healer, trusted friend, and valued member of an unlikely but genuine family. Standing there in the golden light, she smiled with quiet confidence, knowing that while one chapter of her life had closed, an even more promising one was just beginning. Hope, that delicate flower she'd tended so carefully in others, now bloomed fully in her own heart. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe. And tomorrow, I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.